Hi guys, it's Kobe here, and in today's video, we are going to talk about the MoSpline object in the Mograph menu of Cinema 4D, and we are going to try to use it to create an interesting looking flowery object, a very simple one with no hassle. So let's get into it and see how we will do that. So I'm in Cinema 4D, and we go to our Mograph menu, and you can see in here we have our MoSpline, right? So if I have my select my MoSpline and come to its attributes manager, these are the parameters in the object menu. So you can see we have mode spline s, which is simple, spline and title. I'll explain them later, and we have other attributes. All of these stays the same depending on the mode that you have. So this is the start and end of the spline that is created. You can see immediately we added the most spline. You have the spline in here, and you can offset it as well. You can also restrict it so that you don't go past the set amount, so you always stay within the spline that we have here. So that's what you use the end and start to do. And I'll come in here to display this particular um, tab down here later. So for now, the mode is set to simple. So let's go into the simple tab and see what we have here. So this is where we control the spline that we have in here. And now the length of the spline is 200. We can change it to any length or anyhow we want it, right? And in here is the steps. This is basically the number of points that's within this particular spline. We can change the segment that is going to duplicate this particular spline, the number of segment that we increase. So if we set it to 6, and now we come to its angle H, you can increase it, and you can see now it's set to 6. We have 6 different segments or splines in here, right? Same thing, we can do the same thing for its angle on the P and angle on the B as well. We can come to it and here manipulate every individual spline. So if I come in here, we can curve the spline and get interesting shape. We can also twist them, and that one will be visible if I so now I can see how it's twisting them, right? And now you can also bend them as well. So now let me actually, so the segment controls the number of points. So if I should reduce this, I mean the step, if I should reduce the step down, you can see now it's not smooth and all that. So that's what the step does. So I'll set it back to its default, right? So we are actually going to use this particular um, spline to actually see how we use it to do something like the flowery looking object. So I have this one is set to 6 now, right? I'll probably reduce the height down a bit more. And now, so this is sort of going to be the inner petal. So if like, so I'll increase the bend, and now I'll duplicate this one. And now with this one, I'll make it longer, probably 200, and I'll reduce the bend. So this one is going to be an outer petal, right? Then now I'll also increase the segments of this one to like say 12, and I'll simply put it in a Mograph cloner object. It's cloning it because it's set to grid. We'll set it to linear, and we don't want it to move on up 50 centimeters. So I'll set it to 0, and now I'll change the clones. It's set to iterate. I'll set it to blend, and now you can see what's happening. It's blending between the two. So I'll actually select the two most splines, and I come to object, and this is where the display. So we can set it to dual display, which will give us two splines. One is the main, and the one is the real, and we can set it to line, and it will give us just one spline. So I'll set it to line so that we see it will be a bit clearer for us to see, right? So now it's blending between the two most splines. So if I increase it, because it's the same object and has its parameters changed, it's blending between the two. So now we have sort of flowery looking object. So how do we clone say petal or any object on it? So I have in here, I have a petal. So actually paste, I have this object here which I'll call leaf. We are just using, but we can use any object that we want. So I'm actually going to use this one to clone it on every spline. And how do we do that? I'm going to use the spline wrap object. So I'll actually first of all disable the clone, and now I'll come to our deformers and I'll use the spline wrap. I'll make it a child of our leaf, right? And I'll see which it will ask us on the spline wrap. It will ask us which spline do we want to wrap this leaf on, and I'll say this MoSpline. So I'll put the last one in here, and you can see it's wrapping all the leaves on the this MoSpline. So I'll actually name this one as outer. So it's, and I'll name this one inner, so that we see the difference. So it's wrapping the leaf on the outer spline. So if you go to the spline wrap, you can see it's the outer one which is wrapping in here. So we'll do some small changes in here. I'll actually first of all change the axis to the Z axis, and now it's stretching the leaf to fit to the spline, which we can actually come into our spline wrap and say keep length, and it will maintain the length of our, how do you call it? It will maintain the length of our leaf, right? And now, how do we get it? The second one. So I'll actually duplicate this particular one, and this one will be the second leaf. So I'll say leaf two, and now in this one, in the spline wrap, I'll use the inner instead of. So you can see we have two different leaves. I mean, so what we do is we select the inner leaf actually. So I'll actually name this one inner leaf, and this one will be outer, so that you see outer leaf. So I'll select the inner leaf and the inner MoSpline, and I'll right click Alt G to put them together, and I'll do the same inner outer leaf and the outer MoSpline, say Alt G to put them together, right? And now it's all in the clone, right? So immediately I enable the clone, you can see it's blending between the two. So I'll go into the outer leaf and the MoSpline actually. So what I'll do, I'll actually leave fit spline, and I'll actually reduce the two. It has from and to, so I'll reduce this one a bit, and you can see all of a sudden we have some interesting sort of looking pattern. Although it's intersecting, we can play around to achieve something nicer, but this was to just to demonstrate to you what we can do. I can also come into this one, and I also reduce the two as well, and they are intersecting though, but you can see we have a very nice looking kind of a flower. So if you spend enough time, you can actually play around to create something nicer and something very decent. So now if I come into my inner, and I can actually come into a simple, and you can see the pen where it's opening. So I can close it even more, and now I'll do the same thing for outer, close it even more. And now I can see we have some nice amazing. So for instance, I can actually set a keyframe somewhere here, right? And to frame 90, say open it. I open it up, and I'll do the same thing for the other one. So I'll come in here for the inner as well. Maybe I'll let it go forward a bit. Once it's opening from, let's say, frame 25, then I'll set a keyframe for the bend in here. Now I'll actually increase my frames in here as well. And this one to somewhere here, I'll actually open it more. And now we have some nice opening flower. So we can play around with it to get a very nice looking petal or flower or whatever you call it. This was just to demonstrate. This is not accurate because there are a lot of intersections and stuff. But with a little bit of time and playing around, you can do a very interesting things using this. And because it can be affected by Mograph effectors and Cinema 4D forces, we can actually do other. So let me actually create a new tab here, and I'll go to my asset browser, and I have in here one of these. So I'll bring in this particular asset, then I'll hide that asset. So you have in here some weird looking object in here, so I can actually make it a bit bigger so that it will be visible. Then I'll go ahead and create my MoSpline, right? One thing I'll do is I'll change the axis. I want it to be on the Y, so set it to 90 here so that we'll be looking upwards. And I'll make my width a little bit bigger. So what I'm going to use this thing, the MoSpline, to control the width, and because it can be affected by forces and Cinema 4D effectors, we'll use the effectors to control it, right? So for instance, I want my width here to be like affected by some turbulence or some effects or winds or something. So what I'll do is I'll actually come in here and use the same spline wrap. So I'll come to deformers and I'll add my spline wrap again, and I'll make, in fact, I'll put this width in another null object so that the spline or the wrap will be a sibling. So the spline wrap, it's added, and now in the spline wrap we add our MoSpline. You can see it's deforming um our width, right? So I'll change the axis to y, I think plus y rather. So now I'll go ahead and hide the MoSpline and the spline wrap so that you see what's happening. So now the MoSpline is affecting our width in here, right? So if you go to select our MoSpline and increase the length, you can see, so everything. I can actually come into our spline wrap and I'll say keep length so that you keep the length of the object itself. So the advantage we have with the MoSpline is, I mean, aside all these things that we can do with it, we can actually use forces. So first of all, we can use effectors. So I can actually select the MoSpline, come to Mograph effectors, and I'll say random effector, and you can see it's forming a width randomly. I'll actually change it to noise, and now reduce the animation speed to, like, let's say 20, and let's hit play. You can see there's some bit of animation in the width. Now it's affecting the width. We can restrict it so that it wouldn't affect the whole part. But what I'm going to use, I'm going to use the forces. So I'll come into simulate forces, and I'll use turbulence. And immediately I hit play, you can see now it's affecting our width. We can actually increase the scale of the turbulence so that it doesn't affect it as much. And now you can see, you know, our object is having some nice turbulence in there. We can reduce the frequency so that will be a bit smooth. Now you have some nice turbulence in here, and we can actually even clone it. So for instance, if I should come and I'll clone this particular, so I'll add the MoSpline, everything together, Alt G to group them, and now I'll clone this. I'll first of all disable my turbulence, then I'll come to Mograph effect, clone 9 object. I'll put this one in the clone object, and now let's reduce the space in between. So, I mean, reduce the height as well. You can actually add some randomness factor. Randomness. So come to parameters, not position per se. Rotation. Rotate so that it looks a bit random. And now if we enable our turbulence and hit play, you can see it's affecting them. It's giving us some turbulence, so you can actually use it to create some organic environment. There are a lot of possibilities when it comes to the MoSpline in it. So that's basically about the MoSpline. And this is just the simple mode that we've explained so far. So the next, we will go to the spline mode, right? So I'll actually go into a different scene, and now I'll create my MoSpline again, and now I'll select the spline mode, and you can see now we have our spline mode attributes. So in here we define our own spline. We can put in our own spline, and now the advantage we have in here, so I can actually count and say, no, let me actually use a simple spline to avoid any. So I'll use, let's say, the helix, set it to this angle, and now in the MoSpline I'll drag my helix in here. The advantage we have in here is now it gives us the ability to instead of being a regular spline, now we have all the advantages of the MoSpline, so it can be affected by effectors, forces, and all of those other things that comes with our MoSpline. So, for instance, if I come in here, one thing I didn't explain, let me actually come into and add a sweep object, right? And put in my MoSpline, and I'll say I'll add a circle. I'll make it a child so that we are sweeping on the like we are sweeping the circle on the MoSpline. But you can see the circle is very huge, but it's still we are not seeing the thickness like the way you typically see on a sweep object, right? And that's because the width of the Mograph or the width of the sweep is controlled by the MoSpline itself, and that's down here. So if I actually come in here, first of all, I'll disable. You can see we are sweeping. I'll first of all disable my sweep, and in the MoSpline, I'll come to the object and the display. We have dual lines in here. So you can see it has its own dual line in here. So if I actually come back to the spline and increase them, you can see now it's creating its own sort of reel in there. So that's what controls the width of your sweep. So it's not the circle, it's the so you can see now it's increasing. If I increase, it's increasing. If I decrease it. So that's what basically the display that you have down here shows you basically. So now in here you use the width to control the thickness of your sweep, and you can go ahead and add the effectors and other stuff to it as well.
So that gives you a lot of control in here. And now if you come to the object menu again, now you have the stats and end, even though we can get the same thing with the sweep object, but what you don't have is the offset. So you can see we have offset, and now can offset it and give us some interesting looking object and all that. You can take it on and off and see it works some interesting way. So basically that's all about the spline tab. The next we'll talk about our turtle mode, and the turtle mode, you can see we have some sort of tree-like object generating here, and actually the turtle mode uses formulas, some sort of rules to generate spline, right? So this is the rule that has been defined here to generate this particular spline. So we can go ahead and delete it, and I wouldn't go much further into it, but what I can simply say is that actually let me first of all delete all of these for now. We don't necessarily need them. So we have in here, so what I so the text use F. So if you go into our premise and we hit and see there is nothing in here, but immediately we hit F, I mean capital F, you know, a spline is generated in here, right? Let me actually check, make sure everything is set to default. In fact, let me delete this particular one and I'll create a new one so that everything will be default. Now I'll go to the turtle mode and now go to turtle tab and delete everything so capital F means forward, right? So it basically generates a spline moving forward, and it's going, the spline length is this long because in the value here the spline default movement is set to 10 centimeters. So if we increase it to say 50 centimeters, you can see that's how long it's going to go. So let's set it back to the 10 centimeters and go back into the turtle mode. So F means forward. So if you keep doing F, it will keep going forward. But if instead of doing like plenty F, you can do F in parentheses and 4 close parentheses, then you can see it's doing the same thing. So it's generating 4. If we increase the 4 into like say 6, you can see now it's increasing. And now what you can do is you can now make it move on the left or on the right. So and to do that you use minus or plus. So if I hit minus and see nothing happens, so minus, then I'll hit forward again, capital F, and you can see it's branching to the left side, right? And it's branching on this angle because in the value here again and see the default angle is set to 28. If we set it to say 90, you can see now it's branching and going 90 on the left, right? So you can come back and put in another either F or put in our parentheses and put in say 4 and close parentheses. And now they are branching. If we want it to go right, we'll put in plus here and now put in our F. And you can see it's branching on the right. Put another parenthesis in here. You can say 3 and close parenthesis. And now it's generating all of this stuff. If you want to skip, go to, let's say, the next stage, you can actually put in small f. So small f, right? And now nothing happens. But if you do capital F again, it moves forward and you can see the small f created space in here. So with the small f2, if you do like, let's say, parenthesis here and put in like say 4 and now close the parenthesis, you can see it will give 4 spaces in here and now it continues with the f. So there are sort of rules how to move up, down, and it has its all values and everything that you can control in here. And after that you can do the animation, the all of those things in here. So that's basically about the turtle mode, and that one needs a bit like following the rules and playing around to generate the spline. And if you have time and enough, you can generate a lot of interesting splines in here. One thing I would like to explain is the segment mode. So I'll actually come back to our simple mode, and in the simple I'll actually increase our segments into like say 10, and I'll increase the angle to 360, right? And you can see, actually let me bend it a bit so that it gets something. So if I come in here to the animation growth mode, and I'll actually see it grows every segment on its own individually. So we start from the beginning. So this one is done, then it continues from there. But we can say separate segment and it will grow on their own individually. So if in case you want to do something like that and you want them to grow at once, what you use is the separate segment, and that's what's going to control all of them individually so that they have their own growth. Or else you see it as one spline. So one is done, and then another will follow, another will follow. So if that's what you want to, then that's also fine as well. So yeah, that's basically about the MoSpline, and I hope there's something useful that you got in here. And if there's anything that you probably want me to explain further, you can let me know, and I'll go ahead to do that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.